The wind howled through the old oak trees, their bare branches rattling like bones against the night sky. A full moon cast an eerie glow over Whispering Pines Cemetery, illuminating the rows of weathered headstones. It was the third night in a row that the infants' cries had echoed through the graveyard, chilling the bones of anyone who happened to hear them. Sheriff Tom Calloway had been in the business long enough to know that graveyards weren't supposed to be this lively. He stood by his squad car, a flashlight in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other, listening to the distant wails. He had dismissed the reports at first, kids playing pranks, maybe an old woman's cat lost among the stones. But 3 nights of the same sound? No animal cried like that. With a weary sigh, he pulled his hat lower and stepped onto the damp grass. The November chill bit through his uniform and the rustling of leaves made him tense. He moved toward the sound, his boots crunching over fallen acorns. The cries grew louder, more desperate. Then he saw it. A bundle barely visible against the dark stone of the grave, wrapped in a thin white cloth. The sheriff's breath hitched. He approached slowly, his flashlight beam dancing over the engraved name. Margaret Fields, 1992 to 2024. A loving mother. And there, atop the fresh mound of dirt, lay a newborn baby. His heart pounded as he knelt beside the infant. The child was small, fragile, no older than a few days. Its tiny fists flailed weakly and its lips trembled as it let out another wail. "Dear God," Tom whispered, quickly removing his jacket and wrapping it around the baby. He reached down and lifted the tiny bundle into his arms, feeling the coldness of its skin. How had this child survived 3 days out here? Who had left it? And perhaps most haunting of all, why this grave? The questions tumbled through his mind as he cradled the infant close, trying to offer some warmth. His radio crackled to life on his belt. "Sheriff? You there?" It was Deputy Llewyn Carter. "Yeah," he said, voice hoarse. "I found the source of the noise." There was a pause. "And?" He swallowed hard, looking down at the baby's pale face. "You need to get an ambulance to Whispering Pines. Now." He turned toward the parking lot, already moving fast. But as he did, he had the unnerving feeling that something was watching him. From the shadows between the graves, a figure stood still. Watching. Waiting. For what, Tom wasn't sure. But something told him this wasn't over. Sheriff Tom Calloway sped down Route 16, his cruiser's headlights cutting through the misty night. The baby, wrapped tightly in his jacket, had stopped crying but made small, weak noises in its sleep. It barely moved. "Stay with me, little one," Tom muttered, pressing the gas pedal harder. The hospital was 10 miles away, but every second felt like an eternity. He grabbed his radio. "Luann, you still there?" "Yeah, Sheriff." "What's going on?" "I'm bringing the baby and myself. Get the ER ready." "You found a baby?" Her voice crackled with disbelief. "Wait, where exactly?" Tom hesitated. "On a grave." Silence. "Tom," she said finally, her voice quieter. "Whose grave?" His grip tightened on the wheel. "Margaret Fields." Llewyn sucked in a breath. Everyone in town knew Margaret's story. A single mother, young and hardworking, who had tragically died in a car accident just last week. She had no living family, no husband, just a small apartment and a handful of friends who mourned her loss. But no one had mentioned a baby. "Tom." Luann's voice was unsteady. "Margaret didn't have a child." Tom didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. Instead, he focused on the road, on the weight of the infant in his arms. On the eerie feeling that he hadn't been alone in that cemetery. When he finally pulled into the hospital parking lot, nurses and paramedics were already waiting. One of them, a young woman with short blonde hair, rushed forward with a heated blanket. "Here, let me take the baby," she said gently. Tom hesitated, then carefully passed the infant to her. The warmth seemed to jolt the baby slightly, its tiny fingers twitching against the fabric. "He's ice cold," the nurse murmured. "But alive." Tom exhaled, running a hand down his face. "Thank God." "Where did you find him?" another nurse asked. Tom hesitated. He wasn't sure how much he should say. If he told them the baby had survived 3 days on a grave, would they believe him? Would he believe himself? "Near the cemetery," he said vaguely. "Someone abandoned him there." The nurse's eyes darkened. "Poor thing." As they wheeled the baby inside, Tom followed, but a strange sensation prickled the back of his neck, like a whisper in the air, a cold breath against his skin. He turned abruptly. For a split second, he thought he saw a woman standing near the hospital entrance. A shadowy figure in a pale dress, her dark hair draped over her face. And then, she was gone. Tom's breath hitched. He shook his head, telling himself he was imagining things. But deep down he knew. This wasn't over. Something was watching. And it wasn't done yet. Sheriff Tom Calloway sat in the hospital waiting room, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The overhead lights buzzed softly and the steady hum of hospital machinery filled the halls. He had been here for over an hour waiting for news on the baby. The nurses had rushed the child into a warmer, and Dr. Reynolds, the town's only pediatrician, had been examining him ever since. Lewin finally walked in, her boots clicking against the tile floor. She was a sturdy woman in her late 30s, with auburn hair tied in a tight ponytail and eyes that had seen too much for one lifetime. She looked at Tom, arms crossed. "You okay?" she asked. Tom exhaled. "Not sure yet." Lewin sat beside him. "I did some digging," she said. "Talked to Margaret Field's landlord, her co-workers, even her old friends. Everyone says the same thing. Margaret never mentioned a pregnancy. Never showed any signs of one, either." Tom frowned. "That's impossible. That baby's barely a few days old. If she wasn't pregnant, then where the hell did he come from?" Lewin shrugged. "No one knows. But get this, her landlord, Mrs. Jorgensen, swears she heard crying coming from Margaret's apartment 2 days after she died. Thought it was a cat, maybe, but now." Tom's stomach turned. "And no one checked." "She did. Knocked on the door, but no one answered. Said she figured it was just her imagination." "Damn it," Tom muttered. He ran a hand through his graying hair. "So someone left that baby on her grave, hoping what? That she'd come back for him?" Lewin shook her head. "That's the weird part, Tom. There weren't any footprints in the dirt. No signs of anyone being there at all except the baby." Before Tom could respond, Dr. Reynolds stepped into the waiting area. He was an older man, round-bellied and balding, with wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. "How is he?" Tom asked, standing. Dr. Reynolds sighed. "He's stable, but it's a miracle. That baby should be dead, Tom. 3 days outside, in this cold? No food, no water? He should have been hypothermic, dehydrated. But his vitals are strong, almost too strong." Tom narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Dr. Reynolds hesitated, then pulled out a clipboard. "His heart rate, his oxygen levels, everything is perfect. Like he hasn't been suffering at all. And there's something else." He adjusted his glasses. "I ran a blood test. The baby's DNA matches Margaret Field's." Tom felt like the floor had been yanked out from under him. "That's not possible." Dr. Reynolds shook his head. "I thought so too, so I ran it twice." He looked Tom in the eye. "This baby is Margaret's son." Silence. The world seemed to tilt. Margaret had never been pregnant. She had died over a week ago. And yet, her child now lay in a hospital crib, alive with no explanation. Tom swallowed hard. "This doesn't make sense." Dr. Reynolds sighed. "No, Sheriff, it doesn't." But before Tom could say another word, a nurse rushed into the room, panic in her eyes. "Sheriff, you need to come. Now." Tom's heart pounded. "What happened?" She swallowed. "The baby, he just started crying. And..." She hesitated, looking pale. "And the lights in the nursery started flickering. The cameras, too. Like something's in there with him." A cold dread settled in Tom's chest. He exchanged a glance with Luann, then grabbed his gun belt. "Let's go." Something unnatural was happening. And Tom Calloway wasn't sure he wanted to know what it was. Tom Calloway and Lewin Carter sprinted down the hospital corridor, their boots pounding against the linoleum. The fluorescent lights above flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows against the walls. The nurse who had called them, a young woman named Julie, led the way, her breath coming in sharp gasps. "The cameras," she panted. They all went dark for a few seconds. And then the baby started screaming. Tom's stomach clenched as they reached the nursery. Through the large observation window, they could see the hospital's other newborns sleeping peacefully in their bassinets, except for one. The abandoned infant lay in the center of the room, thrashing and wailing with unnatural force. His tiny fists clenched and unclenched, his face contorted in distress. And then Tom saw it. The air around the crib shimmered like heat rising off pavement. A hazy, flickering form took shape beside the baby, a figure barely visible standing over him. A woman. Her long dark hair cascaded over her face, her arms reaching toward the baby with longing. "Margaret Fields." Tom's breath hitched. "Jesus Christ." The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. A thin layer of frost formed along the observation window, creeping across the glass like skeletal fingers. The lights continued to flicker, casting erratic shadows. The baby's cries grew louder, more desperate. Lewin cursed under her breath. "Tell me you're seeing this, Tom." Tom barely nodded, his throat dry. He wasn't sure what he was witnessing, some ghostly mirage? A hallucination? But then, the shadow turned its head and looked directly at him. A cold, unnatural fear spread through his veins as the figure's head tilted ever so slightly as if recognizing him. Then, the glass cracked. The entire nursery window splintered outward, a web of fractures racing across its surface. The overhead lights exploded, plunging the hospital into near darkness. The air filled with the sounds of shattering glass and frantic cries. "Move!" Tom shouted, grabbing Luann's arm as the cracks deepened. Nurses screamed, scrambling to get the other babies to safety. And just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The flickering lights steadied. The freezing air vanished. The ghostly figure was gone. And so was the baby. Tom stared in horror at the now empty crib. The white blankets were crumpled, but the child, Margaret's impossible son, had disappeared. "No," Luann whispered. Where the hell did he go?" Tom turned, scanning the darkened hall. And then he heard it. A faint sound, soft, distant, like a lullaby carried on the wind. The voice of a woman. Singing. From somewhere deep in the hospital. Somewhere they couldn't see. Somewhere no one should be. Tom unholstered his gun, his pulse pounding in his ears. "Let's find him," he said, his voice low. Because one thing was clear. The baby wasn't taken. He had been claimed. And his mother had come back for him. The hospital halls stretched before them, empty and silent except for the distant lullaby echoing through the dimly lit corridor. Sheriff Tom Calloway and Deputy Lewin Carter moved cautiously, their breaths shallow, their hands hovering over their holsters. Somewhere in this building, Margaret Fields, who had been buried a week ago, was cradling a baby that wasn't supposed to exist. Or worse, something wearing Margaret's face was. Tom took a step forward, his boots creaking against the linoleum. The hallway was colder than it should have been, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. The distant hum of machines had faded and the usual hospital sounds, footsteps, murmurs of nurses, the beep of heart monitors had vanished. It was as if the world had held its breath. Then the lullaby stopped. Lewin tensed beside him. "I don't like this, Tom." "Neither do I," he muttered. A soft creak echoed from the hallway ahead. Tom raised his flashlight and swept it across the corridor. At the far end, a door was slightly ajar, the old maternity ward, shut down for renovations months ago. And from inside, he swore he saw movement. "That's where she is," Lewin whispered. Tom nodded. "Stay close." They moved carefully, their steps measured. Tom pushed the door open slowly and it groaned on its hinges. The air inside smelled stale, of dust and old antiseptic. Rows of rusted hospital beds lined the room, their mattresses stripped bare. In the center of the space, a single rocking chair swayed gently as if someone had just been sitting in it. And then, a whisper. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." Tom whipped around, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. There, in the farthest corner of the room, bathed in pale moonlight filtering through a cracked window, was her. Margaret Fields. She stood motionless, cradling the baby in her arms, swaying slightly as if soothing him to sleep. Her long, dark hair veiled her face, her hospital gown stained and torn. Her bare feet left faint, wet footprints on the floor as if she had walked through a river to get here. Tom swallowed hard, steadying his voice. "Margaret." The woman didn't move. Didn't breathe. Didn't blink. Lewin exhaled sharply. This isn't right." Tom took a cautious step forward, his hand tightening around his gun. "Ma'am, you need to give me the baby." Slowly, Margaret lifted her head. And when she did, Tom felt his stomach drop. Her eyes were wrong. Too dark. Too deep. Like a void, endless and hollow. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. Instead, the baby in her arms opened its eyes. And they were just like hers. Tom stumbled back, heart hammering. "Jesus Christ." Margaret let out a slow, rasping breath. "You can't take him," she whispered. Her voice was layered, distorted, like multiple voices speaking at once. Lewin pulled out her gun. "Ma'am, put the baby down. Right now." Margaret clutched the infant closer, and the room seemed to shift around them. The walls darkened, shadows crawling like living things. The rocking chair toppled over with a loud crash, and the lights flickered wildly. Tom took another step forward. "Margaret, listen to me. You're dead." Margaret's head twitched sharply, her grip on the baby tightening. "He is mine," she whispered. And then, the shadows exploded. The windows shattered inward, sending glass flying. The walls howled, a rush of wind that screamed with 1,000 voices. Lewin fired a shot, but Margaret was gone. The baby's wail echoed through the darkness, fading. Until there was nothing. Just silence. Tom gasped, gripping his chest, struggling to breathe. Lewin was beside him, shaken, her gun still raised. The room was empty. Margaret and the child were gone. Tom staggered back, his mind racing. This wasn't over. Margaret had taken the baby. And now she wasn't going to let him go. The silence in the abandoned maternity ward was suffocating. Tom and Lewin stood frozen, the dust settling around them, the shattered glass crunching beneath their boots as they shifted. The presence that had filled the room was gone, but the weight of it still lingered in the air, something neither alive nor dead, something wrong. Tom exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand down his face. She took him. Lewin swallowed hard. Tom, what the hell just happened? He didn't have an answer. His entire career as a sheriff had been grounded in logic, in the firm belief that everything had a reasonable explanation. But now? A woman who had been buried for a week had taken a child, her child. And the baby's eyes had been just like hers, empty, void-like, as if something else lurked beneath their surface. Tom turned to Luann, his voice low. We need to figure out what's keeping her here. Luann shook her head. You think she's a ghost? Tom glanced around at the broken windows, the overturned furniture, the feeling in his gut that something ancient and unnatural was at play. I think she's something, he said. A rustling sound made them both tense. From the corner of the room, an old metal filing cabinet stood slightly ajar. Tom's flashlight flickered as he shined it over the dusty drawers. Lewin frowned. That wasn't open before. Cautiously, Tom stepped forward. The air was heavier here, thick with something unseen. He pulled the drawer open further, and a stack of yellowed papers shifted inside. Patient records, Lewin muttered, peering over his shoulder. For the maternity ward. But this place hasn't been used in years. Tom flipped through them, his fingers shaking slightly. Most of the files were from decades ago until he reached the last folder, a newer one, buried beneath the others. His breath hitched. The name on the file was Margaret Fields. Luann's eyes widened. Tom. He opened it. Inside were hospital forms, test results, and a single ultrasound image. The date, 6 months ago. Margaret had been pregnant. But why had no one known? She had a son, Tom whispered. But something happened. He flipped to the last page, a death certificate. Infant male Fields, stillborn. The words punched him in the gut. Margaret's baby had died. So how was he here now? Lewin covered her mouth. Oh my God, she lost him before he was even born. Tom stared at the paper, his mind spinning. If Margaret's child had been stillborn, then the baby left on her grave wasn't supposed to exist. Unless she brought him back, Tom muttered, realization hitting like a hammer. Or something did. Lewin looked at him sharply. You mean she didn't just come back for him? She made him. Tom didn't answer. He didn't need to. Somehow, impossibly, Margaret Fields had returned from the grave. And she had taken back the child she had lost. But at what cost? A cold gust of wind swept through the room, rattling the old hospital beds. Somewhere in the distance, the lullaby began again, soft, whispering, beckoning. Margaret was still here, and she wasn't letting go. The old hospital seemed to breathe around them, exhaling stale, cold air from its forgotten corridors. Tom clenched the stillborn report in his hands, his mind racing. Margaret Fields had lost her baby before he ever took his first breath. But now that same child was alive, crying, moving. And Margaret, or whatever she had become, had returned to claim him. Lewin rubbed her arms, trying to shake the chill. Tom, if she lost the baby months ago, then how the hell was he out there for 3 days? How was he alive at all? Tom didn't have an answer. But there was only one place to get one. We need to go back to her grave, he said. Lewin looked at him like he had lost his mind. You mean go back to the place where she already took the kid? The place where she might be waiting for us? Tom nodded grimly. If she came from anywhere, it's from there. We need to know how she came back. Lewin exhaled sharply but didn't argue. They left the hospital quickly, the weight of something unseen pressing down on them as they walked back to Tom's cruiser. The night air felt heavier than before, thick with something unnatural. As they drove, the road stretched before them in eerie silence. The mist had rolled in thick, swallowing the trees along the way. When they arrived at the cemetery, the sight of Margaret's grave made Tom's stomach twist. The earth was disturbed. The soil was overturned as if something had crawled out of it. Lewin cursed under her breath. Tom, tell me that's from the burial. Tom shook his head. That grave was sealed a week ago. They approached cautiously, flashlights cutting through the fog. And then, a whisper. Low, breathy, surrounding them. Tom spun around, gun raised. Who's there? Silence. Then, a figure appeared at the edge of the graveyard. Margaret. She stood barely visible in the mist, cradling the baby against her chest. Her hospital gown fluttered, her dark hair swaying as if caught in an unseen current. The baby was quiet now, his tiny face nestled against her shoulder. Tom swallowed. "Margaret, you need to let us take the boy. He doesn't belong here." Margaret's head tilted slightly, her movements slow and unnatural. "He belongs with me," she whispered. Her voice wasn't right. It was layered, distant, like an echo traveling through time. Lewin tensed beside him. "Margaret, that child died before he was born. This isn't real." Margaret's grip on the baby tightened. "He was stolen from me. I had to bring him back." Tom took a careful step forward. "How, Margaret? What did you do?" Margaret's lips parted, her eyes dark pools of sorrow. "The whispering man," she said. Luann's breath hitched. "The what?" Margaret's expression darkened. "He came to me the night I died. He said I could have my baby back. All I had to do was call his name." Tom's blood ran cold. She had made a deal with something that wasn't human. Luann's voice was barely above a whisper. "And what did he ask for in return?" Margaret's empty eyes locked onto Tom's. "A life," she murmured. The wind howled through the cemetery, and in that moment, Tom knew someone else had to die for the baby to live, and the deal was still unfinished. The cold wind surged through the cemetery like a living thing, bending the trees and moaning through the cracked stones. Tom's hand clenched tighter around his flashlight, the beam trembling slightly as he stared at the woman who had once been Margaret Fields, and the child in her arms who was never meant to live. "A life," Margaret had said. The words still echoed in the space between them, heavy and grim. Tom's voice came low and sharp. "Whose life, Margaret? Whose life did he ask for?" She didn't blink. He didn't say, only that a soul must be traded. "That was the price to bring my son back." The baby stirred in her arms but didn't cry. Its black, endless eyes briefly locked onto Tom's, and something primal deep inside him recoiled. There was a wrongness there, a hollow, unnatural presence. Lewin stepped forward slowly, her eyes narrowed. "You made a deal with something that came to you after death. That's not a man, Margaret. That's not even a ghost." Margaret only nodded slightly. "He came in the dark, whispered through the coffin lid, promised me warmth, promised me my baby." Tom took another cautious step. "Margaret, if the deal's not complete, and he still wants a soul, then he's not done with you." Margaret's expression changed. Her face, pale, gaunt, otherworldly, creased with something close to fear. "No," she whispered. "He said if I failed, he'd come for him." She looked down at the baby. Luann's eyes widened. "You mean the baby? He'll take him back." Margaret nodded slowly. "And he won't stop there. He'll take anyone close, anyone who tries to undo the gift." As if summoned by her words, the fog thickened suddenly. It rolled across the cemetery ground like a creeping tide, swallowing headstones and wrapping around their legs. And then they heard it. A whisper. At first, just one. Then dozens. Hundreds. A chorus of voices layered together, speaking no language Tom could understand, yet somehow the meaning settled deep in his bones. It was hunger. It was claiming. It was him. Luann's flashlight sputtered and died. Tom's flickered violently. From behind them came the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps. Crunch. 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 They turned. A figure emerged from the mist. Tall. Unnaturally tall. Shrouded in a dark, tattered cloak that seemed to move on its own. Its face was hidden by shadow, but the air around it pulsed with dark energy. Margaret gasped. She backed away, clutching the baby tighter. "No," she whispered. "You said I had time. You said it." The whispering man lifted a hand. Long, thin fingers, bone-white and twisted like roots, reached out. "No more time," came the reply, though the figure hadn't opened a mouth. The words rattled through their minds like broken glass. Tom stepped between him and Margaret. "You stay the hell away from them." The whispering man tilted its head, considering him. "Would you offer yourself?" it asked. Tom's heart thundered in his chest. What? One life for one. That was the bargain. The boy was not meant to exist. She broke the boundary. "I am the cost collector." Margaret screamed, backing further. "No, I won't give him up. The baby began to cry loud, shrill, inhuman. The air grew colder. Tom turned to Luann, whose face was pale, stricken. "We need to end this," he said. Luann nodded as locked on the thing that called itself a man. "How? By finishing the deal, or breaking it?" The whispering man took another step forward. "Choose. Now." And time was running out. The fog spiraled higher, swallowing the moonlight, muffling even the sounds of the baby's cries. The whispering man stood just feet away from Tom now, his presence an overwhelming gravity of cold, dread, and decay. He didn't move like a person. He didn't breathe like one either. He simply existed, and all life around him seemed to shrink in his shadow. Tom's hand hovered over his sidearm, not that a bullet would mean anything to this thing, but it gave him something solid to hold on to. "Choose," the creature said again, its voice a pressure against the skull. "The child lives, or you do." Margaret whimpered behind him, crouched low over the baby. Her form was beginning to flicker, her edges breaking apart like smoke in the wind. Whatever unnatural force had stitched her back into this world was unraveling fast. Luann's hand gripped Tom's arm. Her voice trembled. "There has to be another way." Tom's mind was racing. If the baby was never supposed to live, and if Margaret had pulled him from whatever lies beyond the veil, then maybe the only way to fix this wasn't a sacrifice, but to break the connection that had allowed it in the first place. "Margaret." Tom turned to her. "How exactly did you call him?" "The whispering man." "What did you say?" Margaret looked up, her eyes glassy, her voice a hollow echo. "I whispered his name. In the dark. Over and over after they buried me. I just wanted my baby back." Tom clenched his jaw. "And his name?" She hesitated. Then, barely audible, Israel. The whispering man turned his head slowly at the mention of his true name. The fog shuddered. Tom stepped forward. "You bound yourself to her. To a grieving mother. But she's dead. And the baby was stillborn. You don't have a claim anymore." "You misunderstand," the creature rasped. "She did not bind me. I was already watching. Grief opens doors." Tom felt a chill run up his spine. The whispering man continued. "But now the boy is real. Living. A soul with no origin. No balance. He will tip the scales." Tom looked back at Margaret, fading, flickering. She held the baby tighter, her face streaked with tears. "I just wanted one moment. One chance to hold him. To feel him breathe. That's all." Her voice cracked. "I didn't know what it would cost." Tom's eyes met Luann's. "We can't give it what it wants. If we do, it sets a precedent. Every grief-stricken soul, every broken parent could be prey." Luann nodded. "So we end the link. Break the tether." Tom knelt beside Margaret. "You need to let him go." She clutched the baby tighter, whispering, "Please, no. I've already lost him once. And if you don't," Tom said softly, "you'll lose everyone. This thing won't stop with just one soul. It'll want another. And another." Margaret looked down at the baby. He was no longer crying. His black eyes blinked up at her, still and unreadable. Slowly, she leaned down and pressed a kiss to his forehead. "I love you," she whispered. "More than life. More than death." Then she looked up at Tom and handed him the baby. The fog immediately recoiled. The whispering man let out a sound that wasn't quite a roar, more like the groaning of a collapsing world. "You deny the deal?" it snarled. Tom cradled the baby in one arm and stood tall. "I deny you." He turned to Margaret. "Speak his name. One last time. And tell him he's not welcome." Margaret stood, now barely more than shadow and light. Her form shivered, but her voice was strong. "Azrael," she said. "By my sorrow I called you. And by my love I send you back." The creature screamed. The ground split with light. The fog twisted violently and then imploded, vanishing with a thunderous snap that echoed through the cemetery. The whispering man was gone. And so was Margaret. Nothing remained but silence and the baby in Tom's arms. Alive. Breathing. A child that had no earthly origin, but whose mother had traded eternity for a single act of love. The silence after the storm was deafening. No wind. No whispers. Not even the sounds of insects in the trees. The cemetery stood still as stone, like the world itself had paused to witness something unexplainable, something final. Tom stood at the center of it, arms wrapped around the child, his heart still racing from what he'd just seen, what he'd just survived. The baby, impossibly warm and alive, nestled against his chest with a tiny sigh, eyes closed. Just a baby now. Not a vessel. Not a weapon. Not a soul for hire. Just a child. Luann stood beside him, her expression dazed, her hair damp with sweat from the cold. Did we really just stop a deal with the devil?" Tom shook his head, eyes scanning the now calm cemetery. "Not the devil. Something older. Something worse, because it doesn't care if you're good or bad. It only wants the broken." They didn't speak for a while. The grave where Margaret Fields had been buried was undisturbed now. Perfect. Like it had never been broken, never clawed out from. As if she'd never risen at all. Her headstone stood tall and silent, her name carved neatly beneath the epitaph someone else had probably chosen. Beloved daughter. Gentle soul. Gone too soon. Tom walked over to it, holding the baby close. I don't know what to call you, he said softly, more to himself than to the child. You weren't born the first time. You weren't supposed to be here. But you are. And I think she paid enough for you to deserve being here now. Lewin looked at the child over his shoulder. He needs a name. Tom stared at the grave, the carved name Margaret Fields, and nodded. His name's Elias, he said finally. Elias Fields. Lewin raised an eyebrow. Elias? Where'd that come from? Tom gave a faint smile. Old family name. Biblical. Means Yahweh is my God. Figured that's about the strongest defense this kid's gonna need. She nodded, clearly approving. The mist had cleared now. The sky above was dark but honest, stars blinking down through gaps in the clouds. There were no shadows moving in the corners. No voices in the air. Just the cold and the weight of survival. They drove back into town slowly. Tom didn't call for backup. Didn't report anything. What could he say? That a dead woman had risen from the grave and made a soul-debt bargain with an ancient entity beyond understanding? That her unborn child had returned with her only to be spared by her final act of self-sacrifice? There were no forms for that. Instead, Tom did something else. He went to the courthouse that next morning and signed a name on the guardianship form, Elias Fields, under emergency care of Sheriff Tom Grady. Lewin came by the house later with a new crib and enough formula to feed a whole orphanage. Looks like you're a dad now, she teased, dropping a box of diapers by the door. Tom shook his head with a wry laugh. I'm a babysitter. A very confused one. But truthfully, the house didn't feel empty anymore. Not like it had since his wife passed away years ago. Elias brought something with him. Not just the weight of his strange birth, but light. And as weeks passed, Tom noticed that the child smiled often. Not the eerie blank stare from before. He cried, too, when he was hungry or needed changing. Like a real baby. Like a normal one. Whatever had touched him was gone. Maybe Margaret had burned it away in the final burst of love. Or maybe Azrael had found another bargain elsewhere. But for now, Elias was just a child. And Tom, an old sheriff with a stubborn heart, found himself softening in ways he hadn't expected. One night, as he rocked Elias to sleep, he whispered softly, You're here because someone loved you more than death. Don't forget that, all right? That's what makes you real. Not where you came from. But who gave you up so you could be. The baby stirred but didn't wake. Outside, the wind rustled the trees gently. Peacefully. For the first time in a long while, nothing whispered back.